Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are, of course, your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we are back. If you didn't know it, we'll tell you now, breaking. We are in the middle of a summer transfer window where some of people have got going. We are still yet to. If you're with us for the very, very first time, you can find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're across all major audio platforms. We're, of course, on X, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we are on Blue Sky too. I've got two of our regular returning guests and a debut we're handing out on this edition of Last Word on Spurs. I know during this time of year, some are not a fan of speculation. They'd rather deal with the here, the now, the factual, which we'll try and bring in this show. And the reason why we are going to spice things a little bit up is because in this last week or so, we've been lucky to have a number of top-tier journalists that have come on Last Word on Spurs. Obviously, Matt Law came on during the week, where some of the feedback was around the cash flow situation at Tottenham. And I think what's very intriguing is we'll get the thoughts of both Adam Osper on that and, of course, Connor making his debut tonight to try and understand definitively where Spurs are on those finances, to give everybody some clarity if they were struggling for that and how that will affect Tottenham going into the rest of the transfer window and more. And there's a lot of suggestions out there, of course, that business will probably get going at the start of July, given that's normally when business does happen around. But listen, we'll see. There's still a lot to discuss during this show. Before I do, let's bring in this great panel back on the show. I'm sure he's still sunning himself on the back of that Europa League win. Adam Osper's back. Ads, how are you? Lovely to see you.
Hot.
Yes.
Thanks for having me back. Looking forward to it.
That will be the definition of this show, hot. We will be, like I say, in between breaks, grabbing for the flannel. That's for sure on this Last One of Spurs. Also back on. That was the main topic on the when we came in from the casting of this show. George Achillea's back. George, how are you? And I know likewise, we're all trying to deal with this summertime heat of the UK, right? We're not used to this.
Yeah. This shine isn't clear skin. It's just the sweat beating off my face. So I'm happy to be back on. Obviously, I know there's a lot to talk about. There's never a dull moment with Spurs. And there's a lot to go through, but yeah, happy to be back on and welcome, chat. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. G, thank you so much. And also this show, I do think it's right up his street. That's why I did call upon him and say, come and make your debut, because I think many out there will be intrigued to get this man's thoughts. I think we've seen him across on X a lot when it comes to analysing Tottenham's finances. It's Connor at Levy Nomics 1882 on X. Cotton, lovely to have you here. How are you? Thank you for accepting a very late invitation.
No worries. Thanks for having me on, Ricky. Yeah, very, very hot, as the other guys said. But looking forward to jumping into this.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure after we talk about Tottenham, we're even more hotter and more sweatier. Because whenever we talk about Tottenham, we always seem to go even more hot under the collar. So we'll try our best to manage the situation. Before I bring the guys in for their opinions and thoughts on the first topic, I will just give a bit of a roundup as to the latest Spurs news as to where we are at the moment, because we've had a friend of the show, Alistair Gold, confirm that Tottenham have offered Mikey Moore a new contract, and negotiations have begun over the final deal for that protracted negotiation. Now, obviously, we know 17-year-old attacker, one of Spurs' brightest in their academy, and that was on the back of his breakthrough season last season, given to him by former Spurs boss Ange Postecoglou. He made 19 appearances in all, and that was around, of course, we know, a period of illness, including 10 of those in the Premier League, with 3 of those being starts. We know he scored his first goal for the club with that individual solo effort against, at the time, Elfsborg, to put Tottenham firmly past the group stages, and got everyone talking about what a special player we have on our hands. There has been a lot of interest in Moore, we understand, both in terms of taking him out on loan for next season. That has come across from English clubs and, of course, European too. So it will be the job of Spurs head coach Thomas Frank to decide what does come next for Mikey Moore, whether that will be a loan to get in regular first-team football next season, or whether he will stay around the camp with, of course, as we know, a big season for Tottenham in store. Again, just to bring around some of the other latest news that we've heard, we do understand that Sheffield United are willing to pay around $6 million to prize Ashley Phillips away from Tottenham, who at the moment are considering whether to accept offers or to once again give Thomas Frank the opportunity to look at Ashley Phillips in this upcoming pre-season. We also understand that on their radar to the Blades, they have Alfie Devine, who is again a person of interest to the Championship side. West Brom are also looking at the potential of once again reloaning, which again will be an interesting one if it does come off, Will Lancashire. Of course, Ryan Mason, now the new boss of West Bromwich Albion, will have known the player fairly well. He did have quite an underwhelming fair to say, loan spell last season. So that is something to keep an eye on and see whether West Bromwich Albion will look to go back in for Lancashire and whether Thomas Frank is happy to accept that. I know on the back of the last weekend or so, there's been a lot of news around this player that has given some head loss out there. And that, of course, is Eberechi Eze. I think it's fair to say at the moment, there is no concrete information to suggest that Tottenham have lost out on the race to him. Although there were reports from friend of the show, Ben Jacobs, that Tottenham's interest, although he's genuine, they have backed off with regards to signing the Crystal Palace player, which I know for some out there, given, I think for many, has become their firm target of this summer. Will be intriguing to see where that situation does go next. So that is your roundup with regards to all the latest Tottenham Hotspur news. And we're going to get onto that show and more. But Ada will come round to you, because it's not often I say it's been a quiet few days at Tottenham, where normally that would, assess some kind of panic in the camp. But it has been a quiet last few days. I mean, from someone that has been connected to the agent market for such a long time and, been around Tottenham for the God knows how many years as a fan, are you concerned at the moment given the lack of activity?
Yeah. So look, at the end of the day, the season finished, third week of May, and players go on holiday. Normally, players will go away for 3 to 4 weeks. Players are away at the minute at the Club World Cup. If you look at the stuff that got done, most of the stuff that got done was all related to Club World Cup teams, playing in those teams. So you'd assume that those types of deals would have been done sort of in advance in that there was like a brief window. And then, the window opens. I mean, the decision, with Spurs specifically, the decision around Frank is probably going to have a little bit of time on it, because that deal got done and then he didn't even come in and talk, did he? There wasn't even an interview with him for like a week or two. So he might have been on holiday. So again, you don't know to what extent they haven't sat down to talk about things. Normally, pre-seasons, when things start to get going, players will be starting to go back in next week. And anyway, with Spurs, Levy doesn't get going until the last week of the window, does he? Until he can try and find someone on the cheap somewhere after his 17 first choice signings don't go somewhere else and he doesn't pay the money.
So you're quite relaxed at the moment, Ads. You're not too massively concerned. I mean, I know, again, coming around to you, G, as you'll know from being on social media, there's obviously a lot of hysterical behaviour from some right now, but the fact Spurs have yet to bring in a new first team player through the door. I think it's fair to say that. We know, of course, they're going to be, obviously, Matty's Tell's deal, despite the club announcing that, is actually going to become fully official, obviously, after the 1st of July. There's also finally the arrival of Luka Vuskovic that will come through the door as well. We are expecting at some point in these next few days to have the announcement of the young Japanese central defender, Kota Takai, which is understood to be a nominal fee at this stage. And then we do know Spurs are also expected to announce the signing, which again is, I would say to some degree, given a mixture of feedback, Oliver Boast from Leeds United for a 7-figure sum. Can you understand, George, at the moment why there is some concern at the moment with regards to the lack of movement into the high-profile players?
I definitely get the concern, because if you just look at last season, it's a bit of an abnormal one. Because yes, we won a trophy, and Europa League is an incredible thing. But we also have to face the fact that we did finish 17th. And when you've got your own owner coming out and saying that we want to win the Premier League and Champions League, you're effectively setting yourself up for fans believing that, well, hold on then, if you're saying that, you need to actually push on and make some decent signings. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration is. And look, I think it's exasperated as well because of how much like Man City and Chelsea have done, and to a degree Arsenal, agreeing the Zubamendi deal months in advance. The slight differences with those teams, obviously, they're a lot more settled. They haven't had a new manager. They haven't had necessarily a whirlwind of a season. So there is slight differences there. But I think when we talk about just how behind we probably are as a squad, even though the Europa League win was amazing, we clearly couldn't compete at the Premier League at the same time. Maybe it's different under a new manager, who knows? But I think to a lot of us, it just feels like the squad is just nowhere near ready enough to be able to handle Champions League and Premier League. We don't know if Frank necessarily can do it yet because he hasn't had to compete on that front at this level before. So I think that's where a lot of the frustration is coming from, is that we need to take ourselves up to another level, especially when there are a lot of talks of potentially losing Son. That would be a big name player. Potentially losing Romero, even though I don't personally think that's going to happen. But there are chances that we're going to lose some leaders in this team, which means you have to not only sign leaders themselves. We're playing catch up regardless because of how poor we were last year in the league. So yeah, I could totally understand the frustration. I just think it's, like Adam was saying there, it's a bit abnormal, especially given the Club World Cup, just how much movement there's been already.
You know, again, it's bringing you in, Con. Lovely to have you here. Like I say, a lot of nice comments coming through for your debut. Listen, we'll try and ease you in as best as we can on the show. We appreciate with Tottenham. It's never easy to ease somebody in, given the nature of this football club. At this stage, a couple of summers ago, we did bring through James Maddison and Gunnar Vicario at this stage. That was obviously, of course, ahead of Angie's first pre-season a couple of years ago. Con, can you understand why there's fans out there that are concerned, they're worried, they're anxious by the fact of no high-profile player yet through the door? But again, I have to qualify that and say Thomas Frank is yet to hold a single training session with the current group of players. And again, you'd feel that might be a reason why he wants to maybe see what he's got, to analyse the areas that he wants to look into strengthening before we do go to market. What's your take on it for you, Con?
Yeah, look, I mean, the guys have said it. I get the frustration. I don't need an excuse to bash Levy and Enoch. But I think this window's a bit of an odd one compared to last year, right? The guys have touched on it. You got the Club World Cup. You had that sort of, we had a window, it closed. We've got another window now. I'm sure we'll chat about it a bit later, but that whole sort of PSR run around we had last year in the last week, with clubs desperately sort of trading their youngsters, etc., to get themselves around PSR. That isn't the case this year because it's only really Villa that have got an issue, and they've got obviously other things they're thinking about in terms of making sure that's okay, with the potential sale of the women's team, etc. So I think it's a bit of a strange window. You've got the context of Frank being new, which has just delayed everything, probably, even though one could argue, I'm sure, during the lengthy interview process he spoke about who would be his targets, you would guess. But yeah, look, I get the frustration, I get the panic. I'm hoping that we'll start to see some movement once the guys come in for pre-season, which I understand is sort of next week, right? And we'll see how we go. But I'm not holding out huge optimism for this ownership, I have to say.
Yeah, I know, Con, that's what we're going to come to a very, very second. I mean, G's already brought it on to the fact. It's fair to say Daniel Levy is, you'd say, maybe ramped up the ante on the expectations of the football club this summer by obviously suggesting this is what the target is.
It's what we haven't done that is more important. We need to win the league. We want to win the Premier League. We want to win the Champions League. We want to win.
So, Ads, they want to win the Premier League. They want to win the Champions League. There's no time scale or time frame on that. What do you believe to be that kind of time frame, if you were having to guess it, given that you've obviously overseen this hierarchy for the best part of a quarter of a century?
Where is that coming from? It's not happening under these owners. That's the reality of it. It's never going to happen under these owners because they're never going to spend the money, to really do it. They never have. The closest we got was under Pochettino, and you can argue Pochettino got lucky because we managed to buy a group of really good players that were relatively young, and he sort of got lucky. And we bought some quality players, but there's a theme throughout Levy's entire tenure where we don't buy established top quality players. We either pay more in a transfer fee for players who are younger, so you pay them less wages, or we've paid in the past lower transfer fees and bigger wages. We don't ever have a situation where we go out and we buy a 60, 70 million pound player and pay him 150, 200 grand a week. It doesn't happen. It's never happened. Well, Ndombele might be the only one, but even on Ndombele, when they've bought those types of players, Ndombele, Lo Celso, those players, none of them were proven established. They all had like one decent season. I think he's thinking, one, possibly two 40 to 60 million pound players and a couple of youngsters, and then hope that Frank can develop the likes of Gray and Bergvall and the young guys. into the squad. That would be my thought process on what would happen this year.
Yeah. I mean, the thing, George, come over to you is they are the ones now that have set that barrier and that expectation by suggesting that we want to win the Premier League, we want to win the Champions League. Again, I will say there's been no time scale on that. There's been, again, no suggestion when that will be. But how did you take that for you, George? Are you of the same Adam's mindset that just simply isn't going to happen under this ownership unless there is a massive change in the way they will operate, or there'll be a change in terms of structure? What's your gauge on that?
That's exactly it, to be honest. I think we'll probably touch on it in a bit more detail in a bit, but the wages, man, it's a big thing now, especially with how so many transfers are done in this modern era of football. It's just we're simply not going out there and offering the big enough wages to pull in the talent that we would need to compete at the top. And I think that's it. And like we said, we spent a lot of money in transfer fees. We're clearly happy to do that, but again, that sort of stuff is amortized over 5 years, I believe. If we really truly, and we talk about Paul, right? I think that's been a lot of the conversation on that I've seen online at the moment is, look, we've won a Europa League, but why do we still not have the Paul to bring players in? Can we still employ Ange to to call the players up? But at the end of the day, I think it doesn't. And you look at how Man United have been able to be swift on Cunha and looks like Mbeumo as well. Money talks. If someone like a team like Man United, despite finishing 16th or whatever it is they finished without winning a trophy, if they come in and are willing to offer you 250k a week, the club of that size, you're going to go there no matter what. It's well, whether they did it the legal way or not, allegedly, that's what City had to do when they came into money. They were a nothing club. If let's be real, they were probably mid to low table fodder in the Premier League when they got taken over with a lot of money, and they had to pay over the odds wages to bring players in because that's what they had to do to attract the players in. And I think because we're not that team that's at the top of the Premier League, we're just not. If we want to aim and aspire to be there, we are now in a situation where we're going to have to pay over the odds to bring those sort of players in. Otherwise, what's to say Villa nowadays, so a team like that are able to offer more money than we do when it comes to players' wages. There are plenty of other options out there for teams like that, and I think we're more likely to see a lot more success if we're willing to sort of match the market rate for top quality players.
The problem is that on the Villa point, sorry to jump in there, Ricky, the problem with Villa is, that model only works if they get Champions League. They're in a lot of trouble now. It's almost like that Leeds model a few years ago where they got relegated. As soon as you drop out of the top four, the money drops. They're in trouble. They gambled, massively pushed the boat out, gambled on being the champions. Now they're not, and now they're going to be in trouble, and they're going to have the loan players going to have to go back, and they're not going to be able to pay the wages. And that is something that Levy will never ever do to that extent. And I don't necessarily think that's the right model either. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. A lot of talks on models on this point, kind of to come over to you. I know again you've been quite interested on it, sharing a lot of the different situations Spurs find themselves in here. For our listeners and audio, we're just sharing on the screen the wage to revenue ratio with the big six. I don't know whether, Connor, you want to come in on this and kind of expand with relation to what Spurs are up against when it comes to the current big six in the league. We've already spoken about the fact of maybe how it's going to be difficult to see how Tottenham really are going to achieve winning the Premier League and the Champions League under their current structure. I don't know if you want to expand that point about how difficult it will be under ENIC, given what we're paying in comparison to the rest around us, Con.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you look at the wage to revenue ratio this year, we're at 42%. When we get into next year's numbers, it's probably going to fall below 40%, to be honest. I think some of the defense of that has been, some people asserting that the reason why we're so low right now is because the club is sort of going after this youth-centric model whereby we sort of bring players in on lower wages and try to develop them. And, that's the reason why our wage to revenue ratio looks so bad now. So I pulled together this sort of this chart that you can see here around, looking over the whole of ENIC's period, the last 10 years or since the new stadium. You cut it any which way. And you can see that Tottenham are consistently under 50% for wage to revenue ratio, regardless of what period you look at. Which, comparing to the rest of the big six, and you don't even need to get into the world of Man City and Chelsea, whereby people will make arguments about them, the way that they're funded or their models, but you compare it to Arsenal or Liverpool, say, and we're just way off it. So to have this ambition that Levy stated of winning the Premier League or Champions League with this model is just completely at odds, right? Because we know that wages is probably the closest barometer and closest sort of connection to success, and clearly it's not there right now.
I want to come back around to Con Adam on this point, but George, I want to just get a personal opinion from you. The main name that's dominated so far this transfer window, when I'll just say this without any real kind of massive concrete confirmation Spurs are in for this player, is Eberechi Eze. There's been suggestions over the weekend that Spurs are backing off their reported interest in the player. I mean, I know for many out there, George, he looks like a Tottenham player. He plays like a Tottenham player. But we actually don't know whether Thomas Frank actually wants him and whether Tottenham are in for him. Is the concern, George, though, that the clubs that are being linked with him, the likes of an Arsenal or a City, this has been a player that we know has definitely been on Tottenham's radar over the last 3-4 years. And it's by the fact that if Tottenham were to lose him to, dare I say, Arsenal down the road, for as much as we've absolutely loved this summer so far, being able to have over in the fact we've won the Europa League, there's a player there that I think we know instantly goes into Tottenham's first team and automatically improves us and elevates us. Would that be the frustration, George, for you, for a player like Eberechi Eze, if we weren't to get him and were to miss out to, respectively, a club like Arsenal, as much as, again, it's our bitter rivals?
Look, as long as it depends on who the other signing would be, right, for us, if it wasn't going to be Eze. Because if we're using another one that's been popular amongst online is Xavi Simons. For me, if we were to sign him instead of Eze, then fine. I mean, to be honest, I'm someone that's just loved Eze so much over the last 3 years, and I've wanted to join Spurs for the longest time because, like you say, he just adds quality now. I mean, let alone all the boring stuff like the fact he's homegrown and whatever. He just feels like a Tottenham player, but he adds proper quality now. And I think if you're then not going to sign him, okay, it would hurt massively if you went to those lot down the road. But whoever the other signing is instead of him would have to be of that level of someone that can add something to the team now, because that's sort of what we need in those positions. We can't really necessarily afford to go for another signing instead of someone like Eze that is just another up-and-coming player that might possibly do well in the next couple of years with good training and good coaching from Frank. I think that's the thing that's what Johnson was brought in for. Johnson was brought in initially as someone that wasn't supposed to be a regular starter to begin with, someone that was going to develop a bit more over time. Tell is clearly that signing now as well. Someone that's young with a lot of potential, but obviously had a little bit of a struggle in his loan spell last year. We've already technically brought in a few players that are of that level of, all right, we can coach these players and make them better. We need someone that can add the quality now to sort of bring us back closer towards the top. And I think if it's not going to be Eze, as much as that would hurt me personally just because I love him, the next target for me has to be someone that can just bring that quality now, in my opinion.
Just to touch upon you, the fact, I think the last time as we've had you on, you've been on here discussing the release clauses and how that works around a player. But the fact there's a suggestion now of Eze, especially that Palace would be open to, or Steve Parish would be open to accepting that release clause in 3 installments. How much easier, Ad, does that make a deal like that possible, given there isn't a need to pay all of that fee up front, which is, we understand, has been one of the biggest problems maybe for Tottenham and for other clubs, because they just don't have that money, the 60 million ready and rolling to go to put that into a player.
I don't think the problem with us getting or not getting Eze has got anything to do, honestly, with us whether we pay the money. That's what I feel, right? So the reason that most clubs backed away from him last season, because I think it was pretty much 80 or 90% of the money up front, which was, I think, over 50 million or in and around 50 million up front, one instalment, and everyone sort of backed away from that, right? The 20 million a year for 3 years and the wages, I doubt will be a problem. What would happen in this situation is Eze's agent will be talking to multiple clubs. That's what will be happening. He will be talking to Spurs, to Arsenal, whoever it might be, who's interested in him. Or if they're not interested, he'll be going around talking to the clubs, stating this is what you can get for Eze. And Eze's decision will be who's the best club he can go to, where he's going to play, you'd suspect, and probably get paid the most. And that's what the decision will be. So, where people sort of flap on the weekend about, Spurs are backing away or whatever it might be, and if we don't get Eze, I don't believe it will have anything to do with that. We can criticise Spurs for certain things, but a player like Eze is within our reach. He will be making that decision, and if we're backing away, I suspect it could be that he's been told he's going to Arsenal. They've offered him this. He wants to go there. He wants to challenge for the league. You're offering okay, but that's what it will be, and that's just sort of a reality of the situation, I reckon. Even if I reckon that we went in and offered the same wages as Arsenal or like-minded club, the reality is if the transfer fees agreed with both clubs and the wages are agreed with both clubs, and you're the player and it's your decision, where are you going to go?
Yeah,
you're going to go there.
Yeah, I mean,
that's just how football works, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, that is the case. I mean, Con, coming around to you was quite interesting. Again, you've put up a lot of different slides on your X. This one's around how cash was spent in the last 10 years up to the 23-24 season. Again, a lot of speculation has been around the last week or so about how much Tottenham do have to spend in this summer transfer window. What would you say out there to certain reports that are suggesting Tottenham do have a cash flow problem?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I saw Matt Law mentioned it on this show, right? Around, and there's been other reports or rumours, around the cash flow position. I mean, the thing I would say is, as at last set of accounts, our cash balance was 79 million, which was the highest in the Premier League. So, obviously, there's some movements this year. There's amount we owe on transfers. We've got some money to come in, which we can go on to, but. If Tottenham have got a problem with cash, then every football club has a problem with cash, right? We, from a sort of cash flow perspective, the problem is Tottenham have managed such a high amount of cash over sort of ENIC's reign, right? And what we do, because ENIC are completely sort of self-sustaining, they don't inject any cash themselves, is atypical, right? So, we will be lower next year. I suspect that 79 million, I've done a sort of back of a fag packet forecast. I suspect, we'll probably be somewhere around the 35 to 40 million pound mark at the end of the year. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. And that is just a forecast because I don't know what Tottenham are going to spend on property, for example, this year and all of those types of things, right? But we don't have an issue. It's quite clear to see that from the accounts, otherwise, indeed every club would. But it is true that our cash position by Tottenham standards is not as strong as it was in the past.
I think sorry to jump in there. I think the reason why the cash flow is deemed to be an issue is we owe this season in payments probably in the next month or so about 40 to 50 million in staggered payments from previous transfers. So I think the cash flow question is, if Connor, how much money did you say they've got now? 76 million.
So look, maybe I'll just cover that transfer piece quickly. So yeah, look, at the end of 30th June 2024 balance sheet date, 79 million was the cash balance Tottenham had, right? Which fell by about 95 million or something like that from the previous year. When you look at transfers, as at 30th of June 2024, we owed net on transfers 279 million total, right? So it was 337 million gross, but we were owed about 58 million from transfers like Harry Kane, right? So of that money on transfers, 146 million of it we had to pay in the next 12 months. So 146 million we had to pay by tomorrow, 30th of June. And we had 51 million of our sort of 58 million that we were due to get back was all going to come in by tomorrow, right? So we don't know exactly when in that 12 months, but at some point before tomorrow. So, if you, as you say, that's probably where people start to get the concern about cash, because net, that's a significant amount of money going out the door. But the other side of the equation is on the previous year, that actually reflects about a 26% reduction. Our position for last set of accounts was worse. So you sort of run the numbers through without getting too technical. You get that 26% reduction. You've probably got an extra sort of 35 to 40 million coming in through concerts and all of that type of stuff, more match day revenue, general inflation. We only played 41 home games last year. 41 games total last year. Obviously, we've had the Europa run. So even with sort of the money we've lost as a result of the league finish being 17th, we've had a whole host of extra cash coming through Europa, non-match day events, etc., etc. So, as I say, I think that ends us somewhere like 35 to 40 million after all of that. So, look, that's not an issue. I mean, and the other thing is what football clubs always have as an option when it comes to cash is a number of financing solutions, right? So,
yeah,
go on, Adam. I'll let you go because you want to speak.
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's all really interesting. I think part of the problem that Spurs have on the borrowing is like there are caveats and conditions around what they can borrow and against what they owe and stuff like that. So I suspect that comes into it. But I suspect like you say, 30 million on the balance sheet is a healthy amount to have. But I think that's where maybe it's like, okay, well, if you go and buy Eze as an example, and you have to pay 20 million now, and you want to go and buy another player, you can't do it because that's all your cash flow gone. And therefore you've got to sell a Son or whatever it might be to recoup that and to balance it out, which is probably where that cash flow thing is coming from and why people are sort of picking up on it. So it's not actually, I think it's not like Spurs are skint. I think it's just that with the money going out, money coming in, you can't go out and like pay out a whole load of money now until things sort of balance themselves out. And I think there are rules around their debt to equity ratios on their borrowing that they've got on the stadium as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on that point, Ricky, if you want, very quickly, just on the covenants, because I know it's something that is often mentioned by the likes of Simon Jordan. I know has spoken about it a bit, and I've done a bit of digging on that now. Obviously, because these are sort of most of our debt is in the form of US private placements to sort of private and institutional investors. You can't see the documents, right? So this is not said with complete certainty. But what we do have is we have Levy himself said at a Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust meeting in October 2021, he said the only covenant on the debt is an EBITDA test. And the only other example we have of an EBITDA test, this is basically the sort of profit you generate from your operations for anyone who doesn't know. The only example we have of someone else with an EBITDA test is Man United, right? And they have to publicly disclose their covenants on their debt. And their test is that they can't fall below £65 million EBITDA. Otherwise, the whoever's lent them that money can declare immediate repayment. Now, our average EBITDA is at about 130 million. So if you assume our threshold is similar to theirs, that debt covenant point is never going to be an issue for Tottenham. So people like to make the point that, maybe we're not doing this on wages or we're not doing this on transfers because actually we've got these covenants on our stadium debt. But, my conclusion is very, very, very unlikely that would cause us an issue.
Can I ask that we're going to squeeze in our first break of the show for our listeners' audio? We've got over 5,500 of you watching the show live. Look, again, guys, thank you so much for all your incredible support for the show. I know, there's a lot of people that want to talk a lot of speculation around players, but I think, we're trying to make the show as listenable, as watchable as possible because, again, I think where we are right now in terms of the market, many people want to see Spurs get going. And I know there's a number of reasons why maybe many feel that we aren't going to get going. So I think this is why this show does work so well. We're joined by George Achillea, we're joined by Adam Osper, and we're joined by Connor over at Levynomics. Give that follow, Levynomics 1882. So just to steer around you for a second, what is your expectations for Tottenham in this summer transfer window under Thomas Frank? Another new head coach, which we know is a kind of reoccurring 2-year cycle with Tottenham. What are you expecting him to be given? And if we use that word backed, I know that's a question that many feel who has actually been backed during their time at Tottenham properly as a manager. What do you expect to see in terms of player profiles being signed in summer for you?
I think for me, trying to look at the squad, I think that's when the whole issue of UEFA registration comes into play because we actually don't have a lot of wiggle room at all. If we were to take the squad as it is right now, I believe we need to sell 2 players just to be able to stay within the right amount, and that's without having to bring any other extra players in. So that's already a little bit of an issue. That the fact that we have to think about how many players that we're moving on before we need to sign. But if you're talking to me in terms of like what positions and areas, I think kind of need to be covered. I think that despite the fact that I think he's going to utilize Gray a lot more in that defensive mid position, I still think we're going to need to sign a player in that area, mainly because I see Basuma leaving this summer. Regardless, I think it was between him and Bentancur, and it looks like we're offering Bentancur a new contract. Whether he takes it up or not, I don't know. But I would see Basuma leaving, and for me, I think we still need a more experienced number 6 for that position to kind of take up the Norgard role, so to speak, that he sort of had at Brentford. And I think, look, he wanted to buy Gray last year before we got him, so I think there is a high chance that he's going to utilize him a lot more. However, he's just come off the back of a year stint playing centre-back and full-back for the whole year. So there's no guarantees that Gray can come into our team, hit the ground running in the 6th position. So I think for me, we're going to have to sign someone there for sure. And it's pretty obvious that at attacking area, as much as we've signed Tel permanently, whether we get another left winger or not, I think hinders a lot on what happens with Sonny and whether he stays or goes. Again, like I was saying about the registration, if we wanted to sign a top quality winger, we're going to have to lose some players. And I think, unfortunately, the closest to the door in that sort of front line would be Sonny. And I fancy Kulusevski playing right wing a lot more under Frank. But again, he's obviously injured for quite a while. We don't know when he's going to return. I think that's why a lot of the times we're looking at these sort of versatile players like your Eze's or Simmons, who, I mean, Simmons has played almost exactly half his games left wing as he has attacking mid. And sort of Eze's played this left attacking mid role in the sort of 3-4-3 formation that Glasnow's been using a lot. So these guys are sort of very versatile and can sort of play multiple positions. So I think we'll fancy a lot of that. So those are the sort of the main areas, that sort of 6, and then maybe 1 or 2 attacking positions. I would love to have a more experienced left centre back, but with our new signing coming in from Japan, sorry, I've forgotten his name.
Kota Takai.
Takai, that's one. With him coming in and reports about him potentially being around the first team, I don't see a world where we're then going to sign a more experienced like centre back on top of that, because as much as he's right-footed, he has played left centre back a lot and been very comfortable on the left-hand side. So I don't see him as as stockpiling the right side with Vuskovic, Dragusin, Danzo, Romero. I think he'll sort of cover that left side a lot. Yeah, it's an interesting one because we kind of have to shift a lot of players on before we can really think about how many we bring in, which is why I think it's so much more important to me that we focus on the quality of the player that we're bringing in and go to that next level of signing as opposed to this sort of youth route that we have been going the last couple of years.
Go on. I was
going to say the other thing that I think is also interesting, which we don't know, is what sort of formation Frank's going to play. Ange played this sort of pretty predictable sort of 4-3-3.
Yep.
And you often looked at the midfielders that we had and thought, well, they almost like don't fit into that formation too well. So you don't know whether anything around that is going to change. You know, the one I'm thinking about the most is Sarr. You know, I never quite worked out where Sarr fitted in that 4-3-3 if you have a 6.
Yep.
This is what I think, for me, when we kind of look at how Brentford were in the Championship and how attacking, because he was very, very attacking in the Championship. That's how they kind of got promoted. That's the one thing I do like about Frank is he does adapt a lot. And I think with Brentford getting promoted to the Prem, they kind of had to go really defensive and counter-attacking. But we saw, even just the season that just went, him switching to the sort of 4-2-3-1. He has gone, even though he does have a direct style of play, it's a lot more attacking than what we've seen in previous seasons. Hence why they've scored loads of goals. And I think he's probably a manager that works around the players he has at his disposal. I agree with that sort of midfield area, which is why I think a 6 is really important. I think no matter what way you do it, whether it's going to be a single pivot, a defensive mid by himself, or if you're going to do a double with like a Bergvall or a Sarr or a Bentancur, I think either way, we're going to need a lot more physical midfielder that can help no matter what formation he plays, to be honest with you.
How much do you think, Con, they're really relying on Thomas Frank to come in and actually improve the group of players as much as will come onto the profile of signing they're looking to make? I know a lot of fans this summer want to see, as we've already touched upon, really, players that have been there, done it, experienced, not necessarily having, again, a number of 4 or 5 players that are youth products that I think have to be trained up and almost be, again, at some point ready for the Premier League. They want to see players that are going to come in, hit the ground running. How much of it is an emphasis on the appointment of Frank for UConn, the fact that he will come in and get a lot more out of the current group of players that with no disrespect maybe Ange didn't do in his 2 years at the club?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of both for sure. I think look, this squad is not the fourth worst squad in the league, right? We anyone can see that. I think there is I've been a big advocate for Frank. Actually, I think he's a great coach. To George's point, I think he adapts very well. I also think, unlike is sometimes the case when you're hiring a coach from a lower, less established team, they can find that step up difficult because actually they've had success playing a low block all of the time or that type of thing. I think with Frank, if you see what he can get out of his attacking profiles and very different attacking profiles, from a Watkins to a Tony to a Vissa to an Mbeumo, all very different, and he's actually been able to maximise all of those different profiles. That gives me some comfort he can make the step up from Brentford to Tottenham. So look, I think there is going to definitely be an element of him just putting a proper system in place that means that we get more points and making more of the players that are currently in the squad. But I completely agree with the guys. I think to me it's definitely quality over quantity now. I think we need a number 6 because we've got a whole host of number 8s who can't really play number 6 that well. I don't necessarily think that the number 6 has to be a sort of monster Paulinia type that it maybe needed to be when we had Ange and you had that sort of lone 6 playing by himself in oceans of space. And actually perhaps it's sort of a more like a deep lying playmaking type number 6, like a Douglas Luiz type. So I think that's definitely needed. That we definitely need to make 2 attacking signings. And then in defence, I think it's someone who can sort of cover left centre back is probably the I don't know whether they'll do the left centre back piece now given sign the Japanese lad, but look, I don't think it's a huge amount of work the squad actually needs, which is the frustrating thing. But what it is the players that they are going to look to sign really need to be established.
How much are you confident they will bring in players that will directly improve the first 11?
Come on, mate. Not very. You know the answer to that.
I mean, the reason why I ask you that is, I look at last summer they brought in.
Yeah, mate, you know how long I've been calling for a number 6. Like literally, like God, a year I've been saying we need a 6, we need a 6, we need a 6, we need a 6, we need someone who's actually a defensive. Everybody's there. How confident? Do you know what? I think they will buy more established players this year for the sole reason that we're in the Champions League. I think you can't go into the Champions League without buying established players that have had some experience playing in Europe. That would be, are we going to buy top class Champions League quality players? Probably not.
No,
but I don't think, it won't be like a Bergvall and a Gray. I suspect there'll probably be a couple of Bergvalls and Gray type players again, because that's part of our model. And then I suspect there'll be sort of 2 who are sort of first team ready, like we did last season, Solanke, and then another. I would love, for me, I think we need 3 positions. I think we need a left back, not necessarily a starting left back, but a decent left back to compete with the doggy and cover for him.
Yeah,
a number 6, 100%, and a winger.
Okay.
Stroke attacker. I think everybody's in agreement with that. And then the other one is, like, you can debate it, can't you? Like, as to whether you say, well, actually, this squad's quite good, and then you could be absolutely brutal if you wanted to be absolutely brutal and say, well, actually, we could upgrade on Sarr, we could upgrade on Maddison, you could upgrade on Johnson. It depends how brutal you want to be. Whether you want to say the players are staying now, we're not getting rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just adding to that squad, or we're actually getting rid of some players because we're going to be brutal.
Yeah. The reason why I asked George that question, do you want to come on that point? The reason why I asked that question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The reason why I asked that question is, I think many were hoping to see Tottenham, after winning the Europa League, really try and kick on and show us that this is a different Tottenham. People want me laughing at me saying that. I think, look, I've expressed my feelings on this ownership. I'm the same as Adam, and I think we all are to some degree. Nothing's going to really change massively whilst they're here. And that's why there is a feeling, I think, amongst a lot of fans that they would like to see a massive change in the ownership. Now, there's obviously been structural changes through the summer. You've had the chairman come out and suggest that they want to win the Premier League, they want to win the Champions League. Up until now, there's nothing showing us that really that model is going to change. And that's why I went back and asked the question to Adam there, George, in terms of what does he expect this summer? You know, does he expect there to be one or two players that actually directly impact the first team? Because I think on the whole, we haven't got a bad squad, but I don't think we've got a squad at the moment that is going to really compete to challenge for the Premier League or compete to challenge for the Champions League. That's why, again, I was interested to know how many players we do feel we are away from that. And I think, again, at the moment, if you were to ask many fans, I think there'd probably be a general feeling we might be 2, 3, 4 players away. Whilst George, coming back over to you, what's your gauge for you on that? I mean, how many players are we away in your mind from genuinely pushing on and competing when you look at some of the other clubs and what they've done so far this summer? Liverpool being active, Chelsea being active as well, Arsenal being linked with obviously a number of players. Should that be in our thinking as well?
Yeah, it's hard to say when you say competitive. I mean, to take us to the level at the top, it would have to be plenty of changes, which I just don't think we can. I just don't think we can do. I think the basis of the first team is definitely not as bad, like anywhere near as 17th. I think Connor mentioned that earlier. We're definitely not. The team is not a 17th place team. The problem I have with our squad at the moment is that when we do have the inevitable Maddison injury, because let's be real, it's going to happen. The track record it doesn't matter what coach it is, the track record of his time at Leicester and here has always been he will get an injury at some point during the season. We don't know necessarily to what extent, but I think the drop-off from when we don't have Maddison to the next option in our squad in terms of that sort of creative number 10 forward role is massive, especially when we don't have Kulusevski for the start of the season. And even then, Kulusevski is a different type of player to Maddison. Kulusevski is a ball carrier. He's brilliant at bringing the ball up the pitch, whereas Maddison has got that instinctive pass that he can make between the lines. They're slightly different in that sort of 10 role. So once we lose someone like Maddison, that drop-off for our squad then becomes massive, which is why I think we need to have a focus on having a high-quality squad, which is why, in my opinion, I think someone like an Eze or Simmons is the perfect target for us, because it's not just about playing number 10. They can play out wide as well. You can have him alongside Maddison, especially with Frank's style of football, irrespective of what the formation is and how he does it. He has reiterated on numerous amounts of times in multiple interviews, whether that's on Sky or even at Spurs or at Brentford, his sole focus of his team is to get his forwards into basically the center of the penalty spot, because he wants his players in areas that create the highest XG. And I know a lot of people are going to moan at that, but that's just that's come out of his own mouth. He wants players to be in positions with the highest chances of scoring goals. And that is players that can kind of attack in central positions. So having quality players like your Eze, your Simmons, your Maddisons in the team is going to be huge for us. And if we're going to lose Maddison for a third of the season, then I think we can't necessarily compete at the top, which is why I think we have to target that sort of next.
And the other thing about this is, like, you know, no manager comes into a team and makes you competitive to win the league in a season. It doesn't happen, right? Look how long it's taken Arsenal under Arteta. It took Klopp a few seasons, even took Pep a few seasons. You know, look at Newcastle. Eddie Howe's done an unbelievable job. How many years? Emery. It takes time. We can't expect that we're going to buy 8 first-team players. They're all going to go in and we're going to be competitive, because when you buy too many players, it doesn't work. But buying 2 or 3 quality players, we saw it a couple of years ago when we did buy the Maddison and the Vicario that season, it massively improves the overall. Yeah. Firstly, it improves the starting 11. Secondly, improves the squad and the players around them to compete more. And as George just said, it gives you options as to how you can play. So, we've got to be realistic. We're not going to go from 17th in the league to challenging for the title in one transfer window. It's not going to happen.
No.
I agree. And so the quick point I was going to mention earlier, I think the reason as why as well we're sort of targeting these sort of players is, I think we don't really necessarily have a massive homegrown issue. Obviously, the main thing is club trained for UEFA, where obviously we're missing 3.
Yep.
However, if we include Davis, we only have 7 homegrown players at the club this season, so we will need to sign at least 1. If we were to sell Davis, and because of his contract extension, maybe it's just to get a fee, we would need to sign 2. to sort of meet the Prem rules. So I think as well, that's probably why we're seeing the links to Eze, Semenyo, because Semenyo counts as homegrown in the Premier League.
Yep.
We're going to need to probably sign at least one homegrown option over the age of 21 for the squad. And I think if you're going to do that, you're not going to waste that sort of signing on just a random squad player. I think it needs to be a good level of player, in my opinion, which is probably why we're linked to these guys so heavily.
Yeah, on that point, I know they've been linked to Kyle Walker-Peters coming back and also Dennis Serkin as well. So obviously keep an eye on that. I mean, Colin, I want to ask you, based on the finances, based on what you feel you're seeing, what do you think they're going to give Frank this summer ahead of the next season? What can you see them giving him in terms of players to be able to enhance the first team? Or do you think he's going to have a look at the squad first, see what he feels is what actually needs to be done before they do dip into the market?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, it's when you come out with a statement like we want to win the Premier League and the Champions League, obviously no one's expecting that to happen in 1 year, to Adam's point. But, that's a statement of intent to make. It's a very odd statement for Levy to make, given he's never done it before. The timing of it is odd from his perspective because he's going to be judged. If he came out and said that in November, say, for example, he'd have a grace period of time to be able to elapse before he's sort of judged on it. I mean, he's going to be judged on that statement in a month or 2 months' time, right? Or right now even. So, it's peculiar timing for him to make that statement, given, the backlash that one would expect. So, but look, I mean, from a purely finance perspective, without getting into, I've already spoke a little bit about the fact that I do think there's not huge amounts to do realistically to get us sort of back into contention for the European places, top 8 or whatever. I think there's a huge amount if we, to get to the title. But in terms of the finances piece, I mean, our net spend, to be fair, has increased from about £13 million a year in the 5 years up to the stadium being built to sort of £128 million net spend over the 5 years since we've moved into the stadium. So the net spend is something that has ramped up. One should expect, or it is needed, that we should be around that sort of 100 million plus net spend number again, right, this year. And that's sort of consistent with where the rest of the big six sit. So one would hope that's the case. Whether it will be or not, we've got quite a lot of work to do before that. I do think there is some money we can get in through sales. I think I love Sonny, for example. He's an absolute club legend, but I do think now is the time for him to go before he risks tarnishing his legacy at Spurs. Richarlison, Basuma, there's these players that hopefully they can shift on, which obviously just helps with the budget piece. But look, I think we need established signings, as we spoke about, and typically they're not cheap.
Conor, stick with you for a second. I mean, just talking about Sonny, I think we're in a situation with Son where you'd imagine he is going to go to this tour, obviously later on in the summer with Korea, or in Korea, should I say, which you'd imagine it will mean that if Son is to move away from the club, that will be at the latter part of pre-season. What do you reckon the gauge will be for Frank on that? Maybe losing a player of such experience, but again, at the same time, when you weigh up, like you said there, a player that it does feel for many out there is coming towards the back end of his career, with all due respect. He's been a phenomenal player for Tottenham, a legend. He'll go down for winning that Europa League. Do you think when you look at the whole picture of Son and what he's done for the club and also kind of what the future looks like, do you feel now is definitely the right time? You said it on there for you. You don't want to see him tarnish his legacy. You feel would now be the right time for him to move on, right, Conor?
Yeah, it is for me. I mean, look, in my lifetime, it's without doubt that Son has been our best ever signing, in terms of longevity, loyalty that he's shown, obviously getting the Europa over the line, at his peak being world class, and, from a Levy perspective, an ENIC perspective, commercial draw, so he has been overall an amazing signing, right? And he is definitely a club legend. But, Lloris is a good example, right, of someone who stayed a bit too long, and Lloris always had a bit of a ricket in him anyway. But, that really showed in his last year or so he was with the club. And I do feel Son is on that decline. I do think it's the right time for him to go. I do agree with you, Ricky, that he'll go after the tour. I think there's been talk of that being stipulated anyway. But obviously, you can plan for that, right? And Tottenham should already be planning for that.
I think when also just come over to you, Ads, when people say about tarnishing his legacy, I don't think. Listen, if he went next season, we say we finished 10th, no one would hate on Sonny. But I think for me, what I've said before is I think the memory of Sonny should be the fact that you remember him for going to lift that Europa League trophy, and not if it's next season, finishing the season in 10th, being a bit part player, not really contributing. I want to remember Sonny from going out on the high, and not Sonny, me seeing him go in terms of his legs to not being a very productive player. That's why I think I want Sonny to go at the very top of his game and not be remembered for, people. What I want to see next season, to make it very clear, I don't want to see people start criticising him online, which is going to come. Even the fact he won the Europa League. You can just imagine next season, if he's not up to the optimum level, which he has been in previous seasons, and he's not getting 20 plus goals and assists, which again he still achieved this season. People saying sell him, shouldn't be at the club. You just know this is what fans are like, right? Because again, people move on from their emotions. Not everybody's intact for what's happened in the last year or so by winning the Europa League. I just don't want that for Sonny. Are you of the same mindset? Add that you'd let him go this summer?
Yeah. I mean, look, he is a legend. He'll forever be a legend for everything he's done. He's one of the the most explosive, exciting players over the past few years. I mean, I think the stuff about even if he did stay next season, which I don't think he will, you watch the legend stuff. Berbatov's there, Modric is a legend, Sheringham, they were all hated on when they walked out the club. So, people have short memories. Sonny comes back. If Sonny left this season, or even next season, and was rubbish, and in 3 years' time comes back at half time, the crowd would go absolutely crazy for him. So I don't think there's ever going to be a situation. I think what I do agree with is what you just said, Ricky, is watching him decline is sad. Last season was sad to watch. He was trying to do the things that he was brilliant at, where the ball goes into his feet. He sort of takes that little touch, spins and goes, and he couldn't do it. He literally couldn't do it. Didn't have the pace, didn't have the turn, didn't have the time. I mean, people forget the final. He was abysmal when he came on for that period of time. Last season, I think, I saw enough, and I thought maybe he was a bit injured. But I think the thing with Son is, I think, I don't have the stats around this, but his output of games must be ludicrously high. And I think when you factor in the fact that he plays for South Korea and travels so much, and he's been up boys, he has to go. He plays every game for them. So I think when you probably look at the games he's played over his career and the travelling and stuff like that, I think that's probably played a part in it. I was chatting to somebody on the weekend, actually, and he said often you find with really explosive players like that, they decline at an earlier age than other footballers as a result of that, because their sort of pace goes. It would be beautiful, which is what we should have done with Ange, to have this glorious send-off, before the season starts. Nice videos, you're a legend, thank you for everything. And sailed off into the sunset with some tears. Yeah,
I mean, just on that point, Georgia, if you want to come in on that as well about Son, and also the fact that, we have got players that could potentially make a bit of money if we are to sell them. Again, I think Con touched upon it there, the likes of Richarlison, the likes of Basuma. How important is this summer going to be, as much as bringing players in, for also getting those players out that we can ultimately, as Adam touched upon as well, brutally improve upon if we want to, George?
If anything, the outgoings is probably more important at the moment, just in terms of being able to understand what sort of players we can bring in, right? Because as I was sort of alluding to earlier with the sort of UEFA issues with the squad size, let's be real, if we're going to bring in a very decent player, whoever it may be, someone of high standard, they're not coming into Spurs to not play Champions League football. So then you're left with that. And I know that I saw a few comments earlier suggesting, oh, well, we have massive leeway with the Premier League. Why don't we just sign players and then not register some for Champions League? But that's going to be, you're not going to make any sort of signing of that level that's going to come in and not play Champions League. And then you're looking at, okay, who do we leave out for the rest of the squad that's available? You're not going to leave out Bergvall. Next closest is probably Archie Gray that you would leave out. And then you start to wonder, well, if Thomas Frank really wanted him that badly at Brentford, is he going to want to leave him out of the Champions League squad, especially with how versatile we've seen he can be with playing in the defence as well? So for me, at the very moment, it's like, if we want to bring in quality signings, we're also going to have to offload some serious players to be able to create the room for them, to be honest. So yeah, I think they kind of go hand in hand with each other this year.
Well, there's one player that we do know could generate quite a huge amount of funds for the club. And come over to you, Con, just to hand you a hospital ball in your debut here. And a nice, easy player to talk about, of course, is Cristian Romero and what the future does hold for the Argentinian. Look, at the moment, we're kind of in the dark as to what is going to be his future at the football club, because there are reports that are suggesting that Tottenham are not going to budge on what is believed to be a fee. They're looking for around 60 to 70 million for the centre-back. You maybe argue this is probably the best summer to attract such a high fee for the player. I think when you look at Romero in general, I think last season, forgive me, he missed something around 80. Well, he only took part in 18 Premier League games. However, we know the influence that he had on the Europa League final, and the way I think we have to say he was, for me, a key component in getting us over the line with that victory, the way he rattled Harry Maguire, the influence he had on the pitch, on the game itself. Where are you, Con, on Romero for you and what the future holds for him? Because there will be some out there that are suggesting if you sell your arguably your best player, what message does that show to the rest of the first team squad? But there's also a feeling out there, as you know, if you're going to miss that amount of games as well, with all due respect to him, he seems to always pick his moments to not be around when there's, again, a upcoming qualifier or a friendly coming around for Argentina. I don't know if you feel that's fair for me to suggest that. What's your gauge for you on Romero and what comes next for him?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, on his day, he's outstanding, right? I think I think he gives us so much in terms of being able to play out from the back in a way that anyone that we could sign for the sort of realistic money wouldn't. But I hear everything you're saying in terms of availability, and I think that's been over his whole Tottenham career, hasn't it? Rather than just even the last season. But I don't think he will go, because I don't think anyone will pay the money that we would demand for him to go. I don't think Atletico will get up to that 60, 70 million, and we shouldn't be selling him for less than that. At one point there was talk of them offering 40 million, which frankly is ridiculous. Even, with the sort of context of him having 2 years left, I'd rather keep him for a year and you'd still get that 40 million next year, you would think. So what's the point? But I suppose the counter to that is we know it's a World Cup year coming, and we know where sometimes Romero's focus is. So it's challenging. I didn't like the timing of his statement either, even though he was digging out Levy to some extent in it, and ENIC to some extent in it, which obviously I should like. But I didn't like. I thought the timing of the statement was really poor from him. It was basically at the point Frank was announced, wasn't it, or whatever. So that was poor. It was petulant. Yeah. It was it was a bit embarrassing, to be honest, I thought. But look, I think we should keep him. I think we will keep him.
Okay.
And then we see where we get to next season.
And I've got to come to you on that. I mean, look, from someone that's in and around the agents game, and what games are being played right now, as in your opinion? Like Connor said, they will come to George in a second. 56 minutes after the Frank announcement, Romero drops his tweet where he wishes Angel all the best. And again, there's that line in there for many that have become familiar with me saying it now. And forgive me, I've got to repeat it again. That when it comes to the issues that Tottenham have faced, he said, from day one to Angel, you've paved the way despite the many obstacles that always existed and always will exist. What's your gauge, and maybe what's he thinking with his agent right now about what he's playing? Is he trying to get a way out? Would there be an argument that he might want to stay at the football club on improved terms, which I find for me quite highly unlikely at the moment? How do you gauge his move based on that tweet?
I mean, for me on Romero, my view is I'd absolutely keep him. I'd make him captain. If you go with the fact that Son is going, I'd give him that responsibility. He is world class. He will go to any top club in the team and settle in. I think when you watch him, and he is petulant, I get that. He is injury prone and he does get frustrated. But the reality is, right, we all go to Spurs and watch Spurs and get pissed off watching them, how open we are and stuff like that. He's in the team playing. He must be fuming when there's 60 yards and there's no team around him. So he goes out and goes and smashes somebody. He proved, I think, in the end of that cut run, along with Van der Ven, for me, as a centre-back pairing, they are, when they're fit and together, as good as anybody in the league, in my opinion. I think you can argue Van Dijk and you can argue the Arsenal centre-backs, but as a pairing, I think they're fantastic and they're as good as anyone in the league. I don't know. I mean, the statement was interesting because we had a chat about it. I'm unsure. I don't know. Maybe it was put out specifically at that time. He was away with Argentina. There's a time delay, and there may be a little bit of a.
He's had 2 weeks to put
Yeah,
something out.
maybe
56 minutes after the Frank appointment.
Yeah, maybe it was a bit of a dig at the club. Maybe it was a bit of he liked Ange and he just wanted to find the right time to give a bit of love to Ange. Maybe it was more that. Ultimately we all sit there and hammer Levy, and if players think he's a dick as well, then and they want to come out and publicly say it, then go on. I'm all for it.
I don't know. I mean, just to balance it out here, I mean, I'm the same as you are. I wouldn't want to sell him. If you ask me what I'd want to do, if I could get into Romero's head and know where his head's at, and say if he does want to stay at Tottenham, I'm the same as you. I'd be going to him, offer him a new contract, see if you can keep him for long term, build the team around Romero, which might sound crazy to some, because I have to say that injury record is going to have to improve. His availability is going to have to improve if we keep him, because you can't have a player that is only fit for a quarter of a season. And again, I know in the games that he does play as a massive effect. I mean, sorry, do you want to come back on that?
No. I was just going to say, not necessarily in that. I was going to say, the bit about someone just put in the chat. He doesn't play. He wears the kit, doesn't play for the badge. I think the reality is sometimes people don't realize footballers throughout their career, they will come to England and they'll say, right, I want to stay there for 4 or 5 years, and then I want to go to Spain because I'm Argentinian. Everyone's Spanish there, speak the language, nice weather, good for my family, good to bring up my young kids in. That will play a part in his planning. He's got 2 young kids. He'll probably want to put them in a school where they speak Spanish and stuff like that. So,
yeah. It's interesting because, George, I will say there's a bit of a split from some of the fans on here in general that listen and watch the show. There's some out there that, again, have got their feelings about the ball, that loved what Romero has said in the past and the way he's constantly held them to account in terms of ambition, which, again, I think is something that I've endorsed as well. But I'm also of the feeling that, you've got to want a player that wants to be here. I think that's so important for everybody and for Frank as well. And again, I will just say this. I'm not insinuating Romero would be an issue for Frank, because we know Frank has got this dickhead policy. But the reality is that you want players that are all pulling in the same direction. Do you think that's something that Frank is going to need to establish very, very early on in those first few weeks to get where Romero's mindset is at and his head is at? Because the last thing you want is with a new manager coming in, is not everybody being bought in right. I think that's what Frank is going to need very early on to hopefully get this project up and running. This is, again, a situation with Frank where, again, it is a step up to him. There's a definite difference in terms of exposure from Brentford to a club like Tottenham and what he's coming into. You've got a situation around the captain where you've got uncertainty there. You've got a vice captain where there's uncertainty. How important is that, George, for you that we get the situation with Romero clarified early on? Because there's something I would like more, that if I know Romero's head is here, I'd love him to stay at Tottenham, try and give him a new contract and ensure he's a big part of the football club's future.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think that's what Frank will do. Frank will, as soon as the players are back together in training for pre-season and whatnot, I think he's bound to have that conversation with players. He's got to talk to Sonny about his future. He's going to talk to Romero about what's going on there. It's going to happen. And I think, look, Frank's a brilliant communicator. I think he's just as good at Ange, probably in a slightly different way, but I think he is brilliant at that. And I think he'll just need to talk to the players to show what his plans are. I think what we're just seeing with Romero, I actually am of the opinion that he loves Spurs in terms of the club and the fans and playing for us, because I've seen the way he's grabbed the Spurs badge and celebrated when he scored and all that when they've defended something, and that the way he fell to his knees in that Europa League win. Like, I think he genuinely loves us. I think it's clear to see that he just does not rate the winning mentality from the people at the top, because let's be frank, he is an absolute winner. You don't just win the World Cup, 2 Copa Americas, Europa League in that back line without it. And I think that's why he probably had such a thing for Ange, because that's what Ange's mentality is. Ange's mentality was, no, it doesn't matter what we do, we are winning no matter what. So I think he kind of just related to that on another level. And I think Romero is just probably getting dangerously close to that Kane level of, I've been here for a few years now and I'm going through another managerial change. I'm going through potentially another window of, are we going to sign some more quality players to take us back to the top? I think he might just be edging towards that closer bit of just frustration that the club is not going in towards this winning direction that I want to be in as a player. So that's why I think that where the tension is. But I think it's then just totally up to Frank when he comes in, and we're not going to know that until the players do come back. I think he's going to have those conversations with the players. I think he's going to lay out the plan for them. And like the guys have said before, I just don't think we sell him because I don't think anyone's going to put the money anyway. And I think hopefully, as we seem to have said before about how good Frank is at coaching players and how he adapts to certain situations, I'm hoping in my heart that he's able to manage their minutes more, or maybe manage the game plan more, so that they don't get as many injuries as they have done before, especially someone like Van der Ven. But Romero's part of that as well. So you never know. Maybe we will have a season this year where he isn't going to be as injured because of the fact because of just the way Frank sets up. We simply just don't know yet. But me personally, I would not get rid of Romero one bit. I think it's one of those players. He's a gem that you're going to find impossible to replace without spending nowadays near enough 100 million. So it's just not going to happen.
I think the concern, again, George, you touched upon it as well, and so have the guys here, is that what message does that send to the rest of the squad if you're willing to sell him? I mean, that would be my biggest concern, is that if you're willing to sell Romero, what message does that sell to, again, your likes of your Grays, your Bergvals, and other players that are on an upward trajectory at the moment, that they feel what they can just skip a bit of a fuss, they can head out the exit door. You know, I think the problem with Tottenham's policy, Con, to come round to on this kind of final part of the show, is that everyone talks about the fact of us bringing in young players, looking to develop them, and maybe arguably sending them on for a higher fee. I think what people wanted, again, I can't speak for all Spurs fans, I think on the back of winning the Europa League now, what I think we'd love is the fact that we don't want it just to end there. We want to build off the back of winning the Europa League and not being a one-off. So again, it comes back to that point that how big is this summer to not only entice players, but convince players Tottenham is the place to be if you want to be competing, if you want to win trophies. And I think that's why, again, many will look at this window come the end of it and have a bit more of a gauge as to what Tottenham want to be. Is that fair?
Yeah. Look, I agree with everything the guy said. I mean, there is if Romero goes this summer or next, it's a mismatch in ambition, isn't it, between our top players and what they want to achieve and what the ownership wants to achieve. And it's happened, there's a number of examples of that happening throughout ENIC's ownership, right? And we can reel off player after player where that's, the ones that we've been sad to see go and the reasoning for that happening. Look, I agree with what you're saying, Rick, and I wish I had more optimism that we would kick on from that Europa League win. But all of the evidence in front of me says that we won't, and we had that opportunity under Potts, right? And that was the time where we could really have gone, and people will use the stadium as as a reason or whatever else, even though, as we've debated, the stadium was financed using external debt that doesn't really touch the club in terms of finances. We could have kicked on at that stage if we had owners with the ambition to do so. So I think it's worrying, in terms of that. The only sort of thing I'm trying to hold on to is this point with Levy's statement. Why would he come out and say that now unless there's something bubbling away behind the scenes? And, I pray that there's some form of inward investment or takeover. Can't see it right now, but I pray that that's coming because we do now have the platform to really take off. That's the one, unlike a Newcastle who are really sort of restricted by PSR in terms of what they can go out and spend and Villa to some extent. We've got the platform, we've got huge headroom. So if you had ambitious owners that wanted to, we could really go. And that's what we're all praying for, right?
Has that mood already rubbed off on you, Con? The mood of the Europa League final? Do you already feel like you've been let down already? I know we're coming into early July. I mean, is it the fact that you wanted to see more of a statement of intent off the back of winning that Europa League this early on? Would it take a lot now to convince you that there is going to be a change around? Because I know, again, I speak to many fans out there, and I think a lot of people that, again, we've had a lot of the guys on Change for Spurs on there. I think they're acutely watching the situation carefully as to what these next few weeks hold at all. And look, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think we're being... Look, we're all delighted we won the Europa League, don't get me wrong. We're all what we all are. What we want to see the club being is competitive every season, not just a one-off. I mean, we can't have another situation where it's 17 years to the next trophy. I think the fact that we've all tasted that success now, we all want more of it, right? And I think that's where, again, it comes back to the fact that I know a lot of people were hoping we're going to really kick on this summer, but is that your nagging doubt in your mind, the fact that because they've been here for so long, the evidence has shown you that when we've won trophies in the past, we simply just haven't kicked on as a club in those opportunities to have done so.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was out in Bilbao, and to your point, it's sort of getting that moment of hugging your dad at full time when you finally get something over the line is, priceless, right? So, we all want that again, and this is the reason why, I don't want to come across negative and people, about leaving here, but this is what frustrates me so much because I can, analyze the finances and see the platform that we've now got to really kick on. And I just don't think it's going to come to fruition. So yeah, look, it has rubbed off on me a bit. I mean, the whole sort of 2-week delay on making the decision on Ange, albeit I do understand obviously some of the reasons. You don't really want to sack someone who's on holiday. You wanted to announce the manager straight away afterwards, all of that type of stuff. That already started to kill my vibe a little bit, I have to say, after Bilbao. But we proved what a massive football club this is in terms of the the trophy parade and all of that type of stuff. So all of the foundations are in place for the club to really, really go, as I said. And, we've got a huge fan base. We've got the London thing. We've got the brilliant stadium now. We've got huge headroom. And I'm just praying that one day we'll get to see what life can be like with ambitious owners.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really, like I say, it's been fascinating having you on, Con, to get a bit more information on the finances. Obviously, where can people find a bit more in terms of what you do out there if people are interested in that? Because again, I know for everybody, finance isn't the thing, but sometimes when it's related back to football, it's related back to this club. Many find that fascinating. They certainly have when Ads has been on there as well. So where can they find, obviously, a bit more from that on your side, Con?
Yeah, so I try to do it in a sort of digestible, sort of not too technical way where I can. So yeah, if you go on to X on @Levynomics1882, a lot of threads on there, and then sort of regularly starting to go on podcasts now. So I'm on the Grumpy Old Spurs Lads, it's Tottenham podcast on a Tuesday.
That sounds like us. That sounds like us every week.
Yeah, it's very fun. It's all a bit tongue in cheek, but that one's good. And then regularly trying to sort of get on some other Spurs talk show, obviously tonight on here. So looking forward to doing more.
Lovely ads. Well, listen, lovely ads. We'll come with ads in a second, but lovely Com. Listen, we look forward to seeing you more on here. Sorry, that's just been forced of habit because you've been obviously here for so long, many years. Ads, from you said at the start of the show, you're fairly calm. There's not the fact they haven't done a huge amount of, well, if any, high-profile business so far. Are you still kind of upbeat in your mood that despite obviously the owners? I mean, where are you on that point?
Yeah, I think the problem is, right, and I remember when I was looking at, even when Ange went, I think it was like 5 or 6 days till they announced Frank, and then you read people on Twitter or going, "Oh my God, what's taken so long?" It's like, just turn it off and stop looking at it. It's like, stop. One day is like a year on there, and it's like if you talk about it and debate it and discuss it relentlessly, then it's tiresome. I would say, the window hasn't even officially opened yet. We've only just got a new manager in. It's like, relax. No one's done anything apart from a couple of big clubs who've got a load of money to spend. If we're here in a month's time and we haven't signed a couple of players, then I'll be starting to think, okay, this is classic Levy all over again. I think I'm quite interested to see how things go because, I've got it on very good authority that Joe Lewis's family are very heavily involved now, like they've never been before. Now Joe Lewis is out of the equation. There's people in and around the board and they are very happy with the commercial side, but they are unhappy with how the football has been run. And they're, so it's quite interesting. And that's why the new CEO came in. That was one of the reasons why Cullen left when she did. And they're on the board. So it'll be interesting to see whether anything sort of changes around that. And it's also why the statement from Levy, the statement when Ange left was, the board, because it's not the Daniel Levy show. So I'll be interested to see over the next month whether any of that, whether we see any of that basically come out. It'll be interesting. So
you will await your verdict until the end of the transfer window before you.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I love you to bits, Rick. I hadn't even thought about whether we'd sign players or not until I came on here, and I think for you. You do the best job in the world, right? You're an amazing podcast. You've got journos on every single day. So it's like this relentless cycle of stuff. Yeah. So it's like a constant thing. It's a constant stream. Yes. You're sitting there and it's constant and talking about it. If you just take yourself back and say, the window hasn't officially opened yet. They haven't returned from pre-season. Players are on holiday. stuff starts getting done in and around July. And the thing that people always have to remember, right, is when a deal gets done, everybody has to agree to it. And everybody has to, so sometimes Spurs might have signed a player and agreed to sign a player now. But the agreement is when we find a player to replace him, he'll go to you. And that might take the other club 4 weeks. There are things that are in your control and outside your control. Yeah, at times. Sometimes things go really, really smoothly. You get what you want, they come in straight away. Other times they don't. Yeah. So I'll give it a month and then I'll start getting worried.
Well, listen, on that point, I've got a lovely 2-week holiday coming up where I've got no doubt when I go away next week for 2 weeks and you lovely people won't see me for a couple of weeks and you'll be delighted with that. We'll have some shows ongoing, don't get me wrong, during that time, but it's all going to come through at once. I'm going to come back and see all these shiny new faces coming through the door and hopefully they're a decent profile. Look, I think what I've always said for me is I just want the club to realise its ambition of what they can be, because I think, like we said, all of us being at that parade, we just can't have another 17-year wait for that. We just can't as a football club. We can't. When you look at the size of Tottenham, as Connor touched upon, this is such a massive, massive football club. And the capability and the potential this club has, we realised it on that day. And, again, I think the reality is that when you look at the squad in general, yes, there's improvements to be made. Yes, we're not going to win the Premier League overnight. Yes, we're not going to win the Champions League overnight. But the reality is that we can be doing much more if we want to be. And that goes back to what Connor said earlier with regards to the finances and ads, again, with agents as well. If Tottenham want to be a club that want to challenge, want to be in that race for players or want to be in that argument and bargaining tools, they can be, but it will come down to whether they want to be. I mean, George, just to close on you on that point, how much do you think it will be a pivotal summer? Because I think this has been one thing that people have obviously looked at and thought in the past, we didn't really kick on after we won the Carabao Cup final all those years ago under One Day Ramos at the time of the Carling Cup. We didn't really kick on the back of reaching the Champions League final. Here we are on the back of winning the Europa League final. How much do we have to use as a springboard to really push this club on?
Yeah, a lot. And I think as well, I think there's no more excuses really, in a way, in the sense of, well, the club have come out and said, oh no, we can't be spending this much because we've got a new stadium to build. New stadium was built. They said, oh yeah, we need to get more revenue from other avenues to be able to feed that into the club. Okay, we've got record number of concerts and things happening at the stadium now. We're spending money every year, and now we've shown that we hold on a sec, we actually can win something. So we need to be able to turn it onto a regular basis. And I think this is an important time to kick on. And I know we've said a lot this show, but for me, it's more about them being willing to bring in the quality. I don't think there's not an arbitrary number of, oh, we have to make a 70 million pound signing. I don't think that's the case for me. And it's not like they have to be a 27-year-old. I want, like, Xavi Simons is a prime example. He's 22 years old, but he still brings you a wealth of experience in the Champions League and across Europe, and has already proven he is of a certain level. Not saying it has to be him exactly, but I'm just that there are players that you can bring in that have experience no matter what their age is and can take us up a notch. And I think we need that in a couple of very key areas. And I think this is the right time for them to, like we say, because of all the changes that are happening at the top of the board. Is this what we're actually seeing? I don't know. I know you guys at the change for Spurs of. It's not always necessarily about getting rid of the club, right? It's just having a focus. Getting rid of the ownership is about having the focus being on the football. And I would hope with all these changes that are going on, maybe they're finally listening, and maybe that is towards it. But track record shows that we've been let down a lot of times in the summer. So again, I'm in the sort of situations, Adam, where I'm like, we are just going to have to wait and see. No one signs their whole team, apart from Chelsea, apparently, before July. It's just, but it was never going to happen at Spurs. Let's be real. So I'm definitely in a little bit of a situation of wait and see. But this is definitely for me the time where we need to really show that no, it wasn't a fluke. We can actually try and win things on a consistent basis. It's not going to be the Premier League. It's not necessarily going to be the Champions League, but we need to be in that conversation every year for a club of our size, and we can do that.
Yeah, agree.
It's just depending on whether they're willing to do it or not.
100% agree. Can I just give you the final word there? Actions do speak louder than words. And I have to say, they are the ones that have now set the barometer. They are the ones that have now put that out there. The fact we want to win the Champions League, we want to win the Premier League. They have said that, not us as fans. So now it's up to them to deliver on what they're telling us. and we'll see that time frame, right? Constantly, you have the final word.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, I don't think any reasonable Tottenham fan is expecting us to sort of, as you say, go straight to sort of challenging for the title, or even, when we finally get there, if we had ambitious owners, winning something every year, right? Because there is a lot of competition for places and trophies, and we know the Premier League's an outstanding league now, etc., etc. But what I want to be able to say is we've had a go. The owners have done everything they can. There's a clear, coherent strategy in place. I don't necessarily, Adam spoke a little bit about it earlier. Villa at 96% of their revenue on wages, and they've, gambled too much. No one's asking for that, but we should be. You've got it up now. We should be in that sort of 50 to 60% mark. We should have owners that are willing to invest their own cash at times when we need it. We finished 17th, guys. This is the time to crack on and do that. When Arsenal finished 8th. In the following few seasons, the Cronkies have put in 334 million of their own money to get Arsenal competing again, right? So this is, you didn't have to stump up anything for the stadium. That was mostly financed by debt plus cash generated from Tottenham. We've never really asked for a lot from you. You're going to walk away with likely the biggest ever return on investment for a football club. Can we have some crumbs off the table, basically? And let's see what we can do. I think that's all we ask for.
Yeah, I do agree. Look, obviously actions are going to speak louder than words, so we'll see what Tottenham do have for us as we roll on to obviously what is going to be now nearly a week away from the players reporting back for pre-season and what that brings with us. So we'll see what Tottenham do in this next week or so. It's funny because we always bemoan there's something crazy was happening around the football club. We had a few quiet days and now everyone's absolutely fuming. So it's just the world of Tottenham. You really can't win. We're fuming when it's completely manic. We're fuming when it's quiet. We're going to get that balance right. And again, it's down to, like I say, the ownership to show us that what they've said in words is going to be backed up with actions. I want to say a massive thank you, Adam, from obviously called the Wonderful Sports Finance. Ad, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll grab you a couple of times, obviously ahead of the summer into next season. We always do. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. Ad, thank you as always. The wonderful
Thanks
George.
for having me.
Pleasure, mate. You're a superstar. The wonderful George Achillea. George, we'll see you, mate, across the summer. Poor bloke don't get a break. We'll get him back on here, I'm sure, over the summer. And we'll see more, hopefully, of Connor. Connor, over the course at Levynomics 1882. What a debut, Con. Thank you so much. And I'm sure, Connor, like all of us, you'll be keeping a close eye on what Spurs do across the summer. And again, we'll be holding them to account throughout, right?
For sure, yeah. And thank you for having me, Rick. Really enjoyed it.
Listen, loved it. Con, thank you so much. Ads, thank you. G, thank you. Well, there you go, guys. We have been the last one on Spurs. We'll see you soon. From us all here, please keep safe, keep well, and as always,